When Claire Vaye Watkins visited our store for her first large publication only a few years ago, our enthusiastic booksellers filled the audience, and loyal readers, we'd completed her fantastic collection of short stories and novella, Battleborn. Much has changed over the past few years as Watkins' reputation as a brilliant storyteller and fine crafter of real character has grown. When copies of her novel Gold Flame Citrus first arrived, it was a bit of a fight. I returned victorious, and after cleaning my bruises, I sat down to discover a world only slightly to the left of our own, filled with the same conflict, faith, desire, and adrenaline as this one, but with a lot less water. As the novel moved onward, I felt myself holding it closer and closer to my face, hoping to secure a safe fate for the family within its pages I cared so deeply for, and the natural world so harshly and stunningly depicted. Watkins is a Guggenheim Fellow and the co-director with Derek Palico. Is it Palacio? Palacio. Of the Mojave School, a free creative writing workshop for teachers in rural Nevada. She is joined today by another wonderful author, Annie McGreevy, a graduate of our own American university with an MFA from Ohio State University, whose latest work, Ciao Suerte, is an interwoven narrative of love and lost amidst war and displacement, and is brought to us by the fabulous publisher, Novella. Please join me in welcoming Annie McGreevy and Claire Vaye Watkins.
Hi, everybody. Hello. Thank you so much for being here. There's plenty of seats if anybody wants to come down, and don't be shy. So what we're going to do, Annie and I, we wanted to spend most of our time in conversation with you, actually, and fielding your questions. So I'm going to read very shortly a little short piece, and then Annie will read. And we are old friends and learned to write together and went to school together, and we know each other's deep, dark secrets. So we're hoping that we'll have a really good conversation afterwards. So without further ado, I lost my galley, my book tour galley that I had all my patter in, so I'm going to have to remember some of my patter, which isn't good because I get so nervous that I can't remember any of my pre-reading patter. Oh, I remember. One of them was, I developed a drinking game for this novel. So if you are interested and you'd like to play along, you have a little flask or something. The way it works is this novel, which is about the drought in California, I'll just read it, and then you drink every time that you are thirsty. And then that's how it will work, okay? All right. This is just the beginning, so no background here. Punting the prairie dog into the library was a mistake. Luz Dunn knew that now, but it had been a long time since she'd seen a little live thing, and the beast had startled her. She'd woke near noon, having dreamed a grand plan and intending to enact it. She would try on every dress in the house. They hung like plumage in the master closet, in every luscious color. Each one unspeakably expensive. Just imagine the ones the starlet had taken with her. In the dream, Luz had worn every dress all at once, her breasts bestudded with rhinestones and drenched in silver dust. Of course, things went one at a time in the lifeless waking world. It was important to have a project, Ray said, no matter how frivolous. The Santa Anas winged through the canyon now, bearing their invisible, crazy-making particulate, and Ray said she should try to keep her hands busy. She should try not to sleep so much. Some of Ray's projects included digging out the shitting hole and siphoning gasoline from the luxury cars abandoned throughout the canyon. Yesterday, Luz's project had been to present Ray with a gift of herself, swaddled like a chocolate in a fur coat she'd excavated from one of the cavernous hall closets, though she was not so dark as chocolate. But she'd roasted under the mink, her upper lip already jeweled over and trembling with sweat when she breached the backyard where Ray was working, into the ever-beaming, ever-heating, ever-evaporating sun. Sun of suns, drought of droughts. These were their days now, Luz and Ray and the merciless sun up in the canyon, a family of light in this mansion cantilevered into the hillside, a bridge for a driveway. Luz had shucked the preposterous coat into the dirt, and instead napped naked on a sun-stiffened chase under the lines of a leafless grapevine until dinner. The once Ray approached her, sliding his hand between her knees, she'd groaned, too hot for sex. The mink was still heaped out back, sculpture of a failure. But this project was better, she confirmed, twisting before the easel mirror in a peachy silk shift, lovely even against her grimy skin. In the closet was a hand-woven poncho of oranges and golds, perfect for the shift except that wool was suicide. Instead, a Hermes scarf. No, a delicate tennis bracelet whose tiny clasp gave her some trouble. Like dewdrops strung around her wafer wrist, something the photographers would have said. But practically everyone was thin now. Luz stepped out of the shift and wriggled into a clinging cobalt mermaid gown dense with beads. It was gorgeous, and she was gorgeous in it, even with her filthy hair and bulgy eyes and bushy brows and teeth that jutted out from her mouth as if leading the way. She twirled, and the dangly beads went click, 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 softly. She looked liquid and wanted to show Ray. Luz tromped down the floating railless stairs in the gown and rubber galoshes and a feather headpiece, baubles winking on every finger and one wrist. At the bottom of the stairs, though, she froze. Across the foyer, watching her, a tiny, tawny, beady-eyed rodent. It stood on its hind legs. It sniffed the air. Its nimble claws worked at something. Kind of cute, except it dipped its head and maybe came at her. Luz panicked, shrieked, and executed a long stride slow-mo kick of unexpected grace and force, some long-lost AYSO girlhood reflex risen from the resin of her quads. They were a tired joke, the galoshes. Ditto umbrellas, slickers, gutters, and storm drains, windshield wipers. This place had not seen so much rainfall as to necessitate galoshes in her entire life. But thank God for them, else the rodent might have ribboned her bare foot with its claws, instead of flying through the open door of the library, going scree! A horrifying sound, that scree! And in her horror, Luz slammed the blonde wood door closed, setting it shuddering on its casters. A cruel instinct she was paying for hours later, for she was now plagued with a hefty boredom and the melancholy of finishing an excellent book, a biography of John Wesley Powell, and she had nothing new to read. The question now was whether to interrupt Ray, in the yard constructing a half-pipe from the plywood they'd pried off the windows and doors of the starlet's ultra-modern chateau, or to handle this prairie dog situation herself. "Scree!" it said. She went out onto the balcony and called down to her love. Ray squinted up at her and whistled. "Looking good, baby girl." Luz had forgotten about her mermaid ensemble, and a little zing of delight accompanied the compliment. "How's it coming?" she called. "What an embarrassment," he said, shaking his head. 10 million empty swimming pools in this city, and we get this one. The embarrassment was adjacent to his would-be half-pipe, the starlet's long-drained swimming pool, its walls not smooth concrete, but a posh cobble of black river stones, its shape not a scooped-out basin, but a box. Hard edges and right angles, patently unshreddable. A shame was all Ray said when he first knelt down and felt it, though his eyes had gone a pair of those smooth, globular kidney pools in the valley. Ray had been to the Forever War, was a hero, though he'd forbidden the word, and he went places sometimes. Here he was shirtless, all but gaunt, torquing his knees against a pane of plywood. His unbound hair was getting long, clumped and curling at his shoulders. On the bottom of the dry pool were smeared a few dreadlocks of dehydrated slime, pea-colored and coppery. Haircuts, Luz thought. Tomorrow's project. She watched Ray work a while, leaning on the balcony rail as the starlet might have. It was impossible to be original and inspired, living as she was, basically another woman's ghost. Ray could dismantle the starlet, hack her up and build with her bones. But Luz languished beneath her. They wore the same size everything. When Ray said up in the canyon, Luz had seen porticos and candelabra, artisanal tiles, a working bath with a dolphin-shaped spigot patinaed turquoise and matching starfish handles, birds' nests in chandeliers, bougainvillea creeping down marble columns and dripping from those curly-Q shelves on the walls of villas. What were they called? But the place they found was boxy and mostly windows, all slate and birch ply. Its doors slid rather than swung, the wrong style for columns. Any and all vinery was dead. Plant-wise, there was the dried pool slime and the gnarled leafless grapevine and spiny somethings coming through the planks of the deck, too savage to kill. Below her, Ray's hammer went whap, whap, whap. Sconces, they were called, and there were none. Where were the wild things seeking refuge from the scorched hills? Where was the bird song she'd promised herself? Instead, scorpions coming up through the drains, a pair of mummified frogs in the waterless fountain, a coyote carcass going wicker in the ravine. And sure, a scorpion had a certain wisdom, but she yearned for fauna more charismatic. It's thinking like that got us into this, Ray said, correct. Nature had refused to offer herself to them. The water, the green, the mammalian, the tropical, the semi-tropical, the leafy, the verdant, the mother-loving citrus, all of it was denied them, and had been denied them so long that with each day, each project, it became more and more impossible to conceive of a time when it had not been denied them. The prospect of Mother Nature opening her legs and inviting Los Angeles back into her ripeness was, like the disks of water shimmering in the last foothill reservoirs patrolled by the National Guard, evaporating daily. Yet Luz yearned for menagerie, left the windows and doors open day and night to invite it, even when Ray complained of the dust, even when he warned that the Santa Anas would drive her insane. Maybe true, for here was this varmint scurrying in her head. Here, finally, was a brave creature come down to commune in the house that wasn't theirs. It didn't belong to anyone. And what had she done? Booted the little fellow in the gut and locked him away. Air hazy with an amber with smoke, Malibu burning and Luz's old condo with it, ticks clinging to the dead grass, sand in the bed sheets, jumping bugs nesting in the mattress, all the more pestilent for being probably imagined. It was some ruined heaven, this laurelless canyon. I think there's a prairie dog in the library, she told Ray. Ray stopped his hammering. A prairie dog? Luz nodded. How did it get in there? She said, I don't know. Did you put it in there? More or less, yes. When? He said. Can you just get it out? Leave it, he said, turning back to the half-pipe skeleton. Ray was not a reader. He used to read the newspaper every morning, but now that the newspapers were gone, he said he was through with the whole reading and writing thing, though Luz had read the secret poems in his notebook. It's not, humane, she said, offering him the box. Plus, it's probably crapping everywhere. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Okay, so my novella, Ciao Suerte, deals with the illicit adoptions that happened during the Dirty War in Argentina. And the protagonist of this story is a woman who believes that she has a grandchild out there, but she hasn't met the grandchild. And so she's kind of like on the search for him. And her name is Beatrice, and the way she pronounces her name in her native language is in my American accent. So that's why it's going to sound a little funny. Okay. Children on the street in Rosario, with Alejandro's white skin and floppy hair. A pre-adolescent volunteer at the hospital, with Sabina's languid gait. A girl on television competing in Odo Pregunta with her posture. Sometimes Beatriz spends hours watching boys play soccer to see if any of them have her son's wooden legs, or if their little faces redden with as much intensity as his did. Children all over Argentina, it seems, who might be Beatriz's grandchild. There are hundreds, maybe thousands. In 1990, she is at the Monumento de la Bandera when she sees a group of school children playing and a teacher trying to wrangle them into line to return to school. Out of habit, she scans them quickly with her eyes, but none of them remind her of her son or daughter-in-law. Then from behind her, she hears Alejandro's voice as it was when he was a child. Throaty, high, full of urgency and mischief. "Spera," the voice calls. "Wait up." Beatriz spins around. A girl with dirty blonde hair is yanking her sagging knee socks and jogging to catch up to the group. She has an overconfident smile like the one Alejandro wore on his face until the day he was killed, probably, and the resemblance is so arresting that Beatriz actually reaches out and grabs the girl's arm. "What is your name?" she demands. The name won't do her much good, Beatriz knows. She just wants to hear her voice again. The girl is not afraid. She eyes Beatriz with an air of conspiracy, as though she likes this old woman's boldness, and this, the fact that the girl seems begging for danger, is further reason to believe that she could be Alejandro and Sabina's daughter. She sticks her tongue out at Beatriz, and a teacher appears. "What do you think you're doing?" the teacher asks, as she pulls the girl free of Beatriz's grip. Beatriz opens her mouth to respond, but the teacher interrupts. "Go with your sister," she hisses to the girl. The girl slinks off and falls into line with another nearly identical to her. Taller, though, with the awkward hips and lumpy sweater of a body already playing a game of give and take with puberty. Impossible that she is Beatriz's granddaughter, then, as Sabina's pregnancy when she was abducted was her first. And only. Beatriz mumbles an apology to the teacher and walks away. In 1984, she reads an article in Clarín in which General Ramon Camps tells the newspaper that he orchestrated thousands of murders and kidnappings. About the appropriation of newborns, he says, "Subversive parents raise subversive children." A system that she has never respected has killed her son for using his brain, just for joining a group and learning. These were all things she had encouraged him to do. And now here he was, bragging about it on TV and in the newspaper. Her son and daughter-in-law had never killed anyone. They weren't criminals. All they'd done was join a group. In 1985, she submits a blood sample to the Grandparents' Index. The Madres y Abuelas de la Plaza de Mayo have support from abroad. They have powerful lawyers. Geneticists have taken an interest in their cause. They have found some adopted children of the disappeared and returned them to their biological grandparents. Beatriz is hopeful, and the hope pulses through her veins like a drug. In 1986, her husband Giancarlo increases his campaign to try to convince her that their grandchild was never born. He normally never gets angry, but he loses his temper with her one night after dinner. "You were a nurse," he booms. "Don't you know? They tortured her before they killed her. Pregnancy can't withstand that." Beatriz knows he's trying to spare her more pain. She knows he could certainly be right, but she can feel the slightest whisper of intuition telling her the opposite. In 1992, Giancarlo leaves Argentina for Italy, something he's been threatening to do for nearly 30 years. He tells her he's going one night as they lie in bed. "I can't stay here anymore," he says. "It's not my country. I want you to come with me." But he doesn't turn to face her. The invitation is just a gesture. He knows that she'll never leave Argentina until she finds the child. And then, unexpectedly, miraculously, she does. It's 2003. Beatriz is 72 years old. She is aging slowly, to her disappointment. She's sitting in her apartment when the phone call comes. It's Mariela, the head of the Madres y Abuelas. A boy in Patagonia has been tested, and he's a match for Beatriz. They've found her grandson. "Un niño," Beatriz says. All this time, she'd never been able to guess the child's sex with any certainty. Imagining a boy, imagining a girl always felt wrong. "Un niño," Mariela's voice sounds harsh over the phone. "He's 23 years old." "I know how old he is," Beatriz says hastily. "Where is he? When can I see him?" A few hours later, Beatriz is in Mariela's office, a bag packed. She plans to leave Buenos Aires for wherever the boy, man she corrects herself, is. While she goes through customs at the airport, across the Atlantic and above the equator, Miguel is falling in love. He's lying on his brother Lautaro's couch with his head on Inez's lap, tracing a polo field into her palm. He's been going on and on about the sport, how smart the horse is, how it knows to follow the ball without you telling it, how much he misses playing. Inez is falling into something with Miguel. She's not sure it's love, but it's definitely something. Tell me something else about your life, she says. I want to know the whole story, day by day. He laughs and looks up at her. That might be hard. Even I don't know everything. I'm adopted. Inez's eyes widen. Adoptado, she cries softly. Inez's father is a gato, which means he was born in Madrid, unlike the millions of people who have come from the villages in the last decades. Inez rarely has a day when she doesn't run into some member of her extended family on the street or the metro. They're at Twitter with gossip about her new boyfriend, rumored to be tall and handsome and wealthy, and they won't leave her alone about him. What must this boy's life have been like, she wonders, with parents so old out in the wilderness, not a biological tie in the world? She looks down at him. Your stomach is growling, he says. Do you want to go get some food? She does. They're winding up the Calle Libertad when they see, coming out of a bar, wearing a white coat and looking gorgeous, a redhead Miguel hooked up with between two Peugeots when he first arrived. Hey, Miguel, she calls to him. Que tal? This European girl had no shame, and that was part of what made her so attractive to Miguel. He can't remember her name. Hola, he says. He can feel his face making itself into a smile, and he doesn't try to stop it. She is alone. Inez looks at him. She looks at the girl. The girl looks at both of them. They are all breathing the same air. No secrets. The girl raises her eyebrows and bursts out laughing. She holds up a hand, waving at them. Hasta luego, she calls, turning away. He stands looking at her as she walks down the street. They're still for a moment, neither one speaking, and then they start walking again. Who was that? Inez finally asks. Nobody, Miguel says. Some girl I met through my brother. I don't even know her name. Then why did you look at her like that? Inez says. You've been yawning all afternoon. I saw the way you perked up when she came out of there. Miguel exhales. We had a good time a while back. What's the big deal? Had a good time, Inez says. What does that mean? They're walking up a cobblestone street and Miguel exaggerates the climb. Inez is behind him and he turns around. It doesn't mean anything. We met her in the plaza, I think. Or maybe at Taboo? I can't even remember. She doesn't matter. Inez knows she's being irrational. She knows Miguel came here to have fun, and that's exactly what he's been doing. But it's in that moment that she realizes she's falling in love with him. She knows because never before has she had this intense desire to erase a man's past. Calm down, Miguel says, laughing a little. Inez balks. Why don't you call me when you grow up, she says. She turns around and walks to the metro. Miguel walks around for a bit, thinking she'll come back or call him. But after an hour, she hasn't, so he goes to a Turkish carryout and gets a kebab. He eats it and then orders one for his brother to go. Then he walks home. Once at Lautaro's, he drops his keys on the table. Miguel, Lautaro commands from the couch. You have a visitor. He looks up and sees an old woman, on the tall side, with chestnut curls and a slight frame. She is well-dressed and unmistakably Argentine, and for a second, Miguel worries that their father has had a heart attack, and she is some distant relative or friend sent here to break the news. He doesn't recognize that her mouth is nearly identical to his because she hasn't smiled yet. He hasn't noticed that her upper lip rises and reveals the same amount of gum that his does when he smiles. She doesn't look up. She seems timid. Who is this old bat? Miguel looks at Lautaro, who has stood up. Lautaro looks spooked. I brought you some food, he says, gesturing to the bag on the table. Lautaro won't meet Miguel's eyes, and he doesn't look at the food. He stares in the woman's direction. When he remembers it years later, he'll remember things that never happened. Like Lautaro meeting him at the door, squeezing his beefy frame through the slim opening, and saying, Vos preparate, get ready. He'll remember Inez calling him to make up from the fight, and ignoring the call. He'll picture his parents, his mother's blonde hair and his father's white hair, looking so healthy and so safe in their khaki pants and windbreakers. They're so reasonable. They've never made a sudden move in their lives. A semi-translucent image of them pulsing in his head like a hologram, making it hard to see the old woman. They don't look upset or even resigned. They're just there, as they always have been. Miguel, they take turns saying. Hijo, los chicos. The words break apart in his head like pieces of stale bread. That's all.
All right.
All right.
Thank you, Annie.
Thank you.
That was awesome. I love it.
Likewise.
Thank you. We would love to hear from you any questions you have. We can riff for a long time, but it'll get into
You might regret that.
We'll get like very go Bucks really fast, so nobody wants to see that, I don't think.
Well, so Claire and I were both living in Columbus, Ohio, when Claire was beginning this novel, and something I thought might be kind of interesting to share is that initially this started off as 2 novels, right? Mm-hmm. I remember I asked you, what are you working on? And you said, well, I started a novel about a water crisis, and I started a different one about a couple who kidnap a baby. And then a couple weeks later, it had become 1 novel. And I was wondering if you could kind of tell the folks about that, how you...
Yeah, well, I think I had one project that just had people in it, and then one project that was just setting the sand dune, and I had I had a great time working on that and describing the sand, and but that was a piece of writing that really probably only I would like, because I like to read things that don't have any people in them at all. You read enough of my drafts of you're like, it's been 20 pages, why don't you put a human being in this thing, and then I had this other piece about this couple, and I couldn't really figure out why they would do this with the kid, they were just I don't know, they didn't seem that desperate, and I didn't want to make it something tidy like that they had trouble conceiving or something, symmetrical and overdetermined like that.
Yeah.
And I just thought maybe they're really, really thirsty, or something like that. But I've been mashing things up for a while. It gives me a lot of energy to put 2 seemingly disparate things next to each other and work that way.
Cool.
So let me ask you about Ciao Suerte. Okay. When you were reading, I don't know if the audience got this, but from my point, I could tell that you were moving really fast through those pages. So,
I was skipping a lot.
Yeah. So you started at the first page, and you got at least halfway in.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that seems to me to suggest that one of the most amazing accomplishment about this great little book is that there's great narrative momentum and mysteries, and people are surprising, and you could hear that, right? But there's also we pause and expand a moment and live in it for a while, and then go into the past and go into the future. And did that take a lot of outlining, planning out, here's where I'm going to go, and then I'm going to pause? Or it just seems so tight, the movement between forward momentum and then meditative thinking?
Yeah, that's a good question. Initially, the grandmother character was just kind of like a robot who wanted to find her grandson, and actually my editor was like, let's give her some room to breathe, let's find out why she only had 1 child, and that was the child that was killed in the Dirty War. Let's find out where her husband is, he's not around anymore, so let's put him someplace. So one of the things you kind of learn in grad school, right? There's no right or wrong way to write, but one of the things that we learned, right, is that flashbacks are kind of boring to read. And anyway, there's a lot of flashbacks in here that my editor was kind of like, just do it, so I didn't do a lot of outlining. No. Yeah. I took a really intuitive approach, just of what do we need to know about these characters in order to have their motivations, kind of like you said, be less symmetrical, right? I wanted to make their lives a little messier.
Yeah, I love that. We'd be happy to take any questions that the audience has too. We're supposed to encourage you to use the microphone since this is being recorded, and if you don't, then the listener can't hear you. Hi, Devin.
Hello, Claire.
Hey.
Thanks for coming to DC. I remember when you were working on this book, you talked about the research that you were doing and speaking to experts, climatologists, or different scientists, and that you would propose a scenario and they'd say, oh, it would be actually much worse. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your research process, and actually if both of you could talk about your research process, since it seems like a lot of research is required for both of these narratives.
I imagine this happened to you too, where like you would imagine something and then you would go and do the research to try to back it up and make it feel real or whatever, and then find out that the truth was so much more bizarre and upsetting than, I mean, I imagine writing about something like the Dirty War, you're just like, oh, really? That was there something really surprising for you?
Yeah, I actually did. So doing research for fiction projects is the most fun kind of research there is. You just find out all this stuff about something you're interested in. It doesn't feel like research for writing a paper or an article at all. But I ended up doing a ton of research on Reddit, you know, that like what monster of a website. I just went on the Argentina and I literally like asked questions. I basically asked them to like fact check the manuscript. And people would go and say like, I'm going to go visit my grandmother in the nursing home this weekend. She's the age of your protagonist, and I'm going to ask her all these things. So it was like a really risky but also really personal way to do research that ended up being, like, you know, it was far more, like I learned, for example, that it was really uncommon for a woman to be a nurse in Argentina in the 50s and 60s. So I had to sort of figure out a way for the narrator here to become a nurse, which was kind of upsetting, but it also made sense with the context.
Right. Yeah. This a similar kind of thing where I would like try to imagine like a worst case scenario for like drought in California, and then I would ask someone who specializes in like basically what was constantly revealed to me is I would come up with like my idea of worst case scenario, and someone would be like, yeah, that's as bad as it can get for affluent white people. You're right. But I sadly must alert you to the existence of all of these other much more marginalized people in society, and how much worse it could get for them. And, pointing out that we have this, Catherine Schultz articulates this as so often better than I can, but we have this idea of like climate change and the disastrous impacts for societies is that something will happen, but it's actually already happening for lots of marginalized communities. Like they're already feeling, emergency conditions. It's just that most of us are insulated from that because we're in a really comfortable position in society. Thank you for that question, Devin. I think we have another.
Yeah, I have two questions for Claire. I'll try to make them as short as possible. The first one, and you talked a little bit about how you were putting these two books together, but I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to the process by which you write. The book has so many other disparate elements from this, what I thought was just incredible backstory of Levi, sort of encapsulated into 3 or 4 pages, just but very dense and rich. And then you've got the primer of the desert animals or the sand animals, and obviously you didn't just chronologically write all the way through. So if you could talk about that. And then the other question was, your books are so much, both this and the story is about a sense of place, and in particular the West, and why that is, and whether there are any particular writers who've influenced you in that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, to take the first question, the process, the weirdness of the book and the maximalistic and the sort of hybridized nature of it comes a lot from just always, I have a very promiscuous sensibility and I read really widely. And so it wasn't like I had one aesthetic or like theme or something that I was like running that flag up the pole every day. I was like, every day I was interested in something else. And also to get myself back to the computer, back to the page, I would give myself exercises like, I'd be like, oh, I don't really want to work on this. What I really want to do is read about the Mormon Exodus all day and then write a reenactment of that, And then I was like, all right, then do it. Like, it's the tremendous freedom of writing in complete obscurity. It's like, who cares if you do that? Yeah. And then I would always say like, well, I can cut that. It has nothing to do with the book, so I can always cut it. But then I never cut it. I was just like, no, now this is a book that has a catalog of maybe mystical creatures in it. And this is a book that has a transcript from like a psychiatric evaluation of an inmate and so on, I just started to allow the aesthetic to be more maximalistic and weirder. And to the first question about place, I think it's just, you know, I mean, the American West is where I'm from, and so it's the place that I have the distance on to feel like I can say something about it. But it's also probably just that it's not subtle, you know, like. I lived in Pennsylvania for many years, and that's a big place, and you drive from one end to the other, but you never ever think of like death while you do that. Like you're just like hamburger or tree, or it's not. It's like a subtle. The emotional register is a little more mellow. Whereas if you drive from one end of Nevada to the other, like you will meet your maker. You'll like look him in the eyes, you know, and you'll be traveling with someone, and your relationship will fall apart and then be fused back together. It's like, I don't know, it's just a more dramatic landscape to me, and I like to mind that stuff. Did you give yourself any exercises with Ciao Suerte? Like any tricks to just like, I gotta get the words down?
No, I didn't. No, it didn't. I didn't have to do that so much, but I did a similar thing to you of you can do whatever you want and then just cut it later. Like I assumed that, like initially I thought, well, the whole thing will have to be set in one place or we'll have to stay with one character. And then I thought, well, I got kind of bored with one character and I'd move to another. And that ended up being what made it a stronger story, I think, than if we had stayed with one person. Yeah. You know, that kind of like, I almost thought of it as like an ADD quality for myself of like I bored myself, you know,
yeah,
but that gave it the movement, you know.
Yeah, right. I mean, and when you think that, I get that too. Like, I'm just like, oh, I've been doing this for a while. It's almost like once I figure out how to do something, like, oh, I've been writing third person limited from the perspective of this former model for 100 pages now. I got it. And then that moment, the moment I figured out, I'm not interested in it anymore.
Yeah.
I want to do something else.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Hi.
So I really enjoyed your book, Claire, Battleborn, and I thought it was a really like distinct novel that I had never like seen anywhere before. I'm from Salt Lake City, and I've spent a lot of my youth like going back to Elko and driving out like the Owens River Valley. And I read that you were from Bishop. Right, is that right?
I was born there. Yeah.
Okay, and I was wondering if like how that affected your writing and like about the American West, because I just really enjoy reading about like the desert. I really enjoyed that.
Thank you. I think one thing that was characteristic of my upbringing in the desert was that it was very remote geographically. I remember actually turning in early stories from Battleborn to you, Annie, and you being an East Coaster, you would be like, why doesn't he just take this girl to the hospital? Like, you know, I'm like, oh, I forgot to say the hospital is hundreds of miles away. You know, like I was basically like translating a sense of scale. And so that was probably, you know, in great distances, like we lived way out in the Mojave Desert in a town of like 50 people. And so if we wanted like food, we went to the grocery store like twice a month. We would drive for like about 100 miles over the mountains, and my mom would just tell me stories about anything, you know. We just like talked and told tales there. It's really hard to figure out like why you are the writer you are, but I think that has something to do with it. For me, it's like the automobile, probably, you know. Any thoughts on your writer origin story, Annie?
I mean, almost my entire family is here, and I feel like my parents are both storytellers. I don't know. I think if we could figure it out, I don't know if we'd be doing it, you know?
Yeah, right.
It's the mystery is definitely a motivator for me.
Yeah, and I almost don't really want to know very much about my own process or my own interests. Like, I want to know about yours, and I want to know how your brain works and how Nabokov's worked and Jane Austen and so on, but I don't want to know what mine is doing, you know? I guess I'm a little bit superstitious that way. Yeah. Like, I think it would ruin it, maybe.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, once you figure it out, you know, probably pretty grim.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess we have time for, we want to do like one more if there's any burning questions out there.
Last questions?
Then should we say thank you?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it. Thank you.